Please. I didn't do anything wrong. Get out of my house. You don't belong here.
You aren't an investment, Evelyn. You're a liability in a designer gown. The words cut through the stillness of the marble-floored sunroom, sharper than the clink of Beatrice Sterling's silver spoon against her teacup. Evelyn Thorne sat perfectly still, her hand resting protectively over the slight swell of her 4-month pregnancy. Across from her, Beatrice leaned back, her eyes scanning Evelyn with the clinical detachment of a jeweler inspecting a flawed diamond. "Is that how Julian describes me when I'm not in the room?" Evelyn asked, her voice deceptively calm. Beatrice's eyes flashed. "Julian is a man of business. He understands that a billionaire's legacy requires a certain caliber of woman. You are a reminder of a lapse in his judgment." "The doctor says the baby is healthy," Evelyn countered, refusing to let her hand tremble. "That is the only legacy I'm focused on right now." Beatrice set her cup down with a deliberate, echoing clack. "A healthy heir is the bare minimum, dear. But the Sterling Gala is in 3 days. I expect you to look like a queen, not a weary governess. Do you have any idea how many women would have given their lives to be in your position? Yet, here you are, barely managing to hold your head up." Evelyn felt a flicker of the woman she used to be, the architect who could command a construction site with a single look. She had married Julian for love, but his mother treated their marriage like a hostile takeover. "I'm doing my best, Beatrice." "Your best is remarkably mediocre," Beatrice snapped. She stood up, smoothing her silk skirt. "I've invited the Holloway family for dinner tonight. They are our primary investors. I expect you to be dressed by 6, and for heaven's sake, speak only when it adds value to our name. Julian is under enough pressure without having to apologize for your humble origins." Evelyn's grip tightened on her saucer. "Julian has never asked me to apologize for who I am." Beatrice paused at the doorway, a cruel smirk playing on her lips. "Julian is a man of duty. He tells you what you need to hear to keep you compliant. But don't mistake his kindness for satisfaction. There's a reason he hasn't told you about the new merger terms, isn't there?" Evelyn's heart skipped. "What merger terms?" Beatrice tilted her head. "Oh dear. He hasn't mentioned the legacy clause? How unfortunate. I suppose he didn't want to stress the delicate mother of his child with the reality of his exit strategy." Before Evelyn could demand an explanation, the heavy oak doors swung open. A frantic maid rushed in, clutching a silver tray. "Madam Sterling, I'm so sorry, but there is a call on the private line," the maid stammered. "They said it's regarding the silent partner." Beatrice's composure fractured. Her hand flew to her throat. "The private line. Now?" She turned back to Evelyn, her eyes narrowing. "We aren't finished," she hissed, before sweeping out. Evelyn sat alone, her phone vibrating in her lap. A message flashed on the screen. "The transition begins today. Are you ready to stop hiding? Tell me exactly what a legacy clause entails, Julian. Okay? And don't use your CEO voice." Evelyn stood by the floor-to-ceiling window of their bedroom, watching the rain streak against the glass. Behind her, Julian paused while unfastening his cufflinks. The silence that followed was heavy, filled with the scent of his expensive cologne and the unspoken secrets of the Sterling Empire. Julian sighed, stepping toward her. "Evelyn, my mother has a way of twisting legal jargon to sound like a threat. It's just paperwork for the Holloway merger. It's boring. Administrative. Does it involve our child?" Evelyn turned, her eyes searching his. She called it an exit strategy. Why would a merger need an exit strategy for a wife? Julian reached for her hands, but she stepped back, creating a deliberate gap between them. His expression softened into that familiar look of pity that now made Evelyn's skin crawl. "It's a standard contingency, Evie. If things change, the Sterling assets remain protected. It's for the baby's sake." to ensure the lineage is never compromised by outside litigation. Outside litigation, Evelyn repeated, her voice a low whisper. You mean me? On the outside factor. You're overthinking this because of the pregnancy hormones, Julian said, his tone straying dangerously close to patronizing. Beatrice just wants to ensure the Halloways feel secure. Now, are you wearing the sapphire set tonight? It matches the sterling colors. The dismissal was surgical. He wasn't lying, but he wasn't telling the whole truth either. Evelyn realized with a sinking heart that Beatrice hadn't been bluffing. Julian was managing her, not partnering with her. I'll be ready, she said, her voice devoid of emotion. As Julian disappeared into the dressing room, Evelyn's phone buzzed again. It was the same encrypted number. This time, there was an attachment. She opened it to find a scanned PDF of the merger page 42. Her eyes blurred as she read the highlighted text. In the event of marital dissolution following the birth of an heir, primary custody is forfeited to the Sterling Trust. The maternal party shall receive a structured settlement in exchange for a total non-disclosure agreement and permanent relocation. The room felt like it was spinning. They weren't just planning to sideline her. They were planning to buy her out of her own child's life. A sharp knock at the door interrupted her spiraling thoughts. It was Beatrice's personal assistant, Marcus. He didn't wait for her to answer before stepping inside. Mrs. Sterling, Marcus said, his face a mask of professional indifference. Your mother-in-law has requested you hand over your personal cell phone for the evening. She's concerned about unauthorized leaks regarding the Halloway deal. She's provided this temporary device for you to use. He held out a sleek, locked phone. It was a clear power move, an attempt to cut off her connection to whoever was sending her those documents. Evelyn looked at the encrypted message one last time before Marcus could see it. The final line read, "The silent partner is waiting for your signal." Of course, Evelyn said, her heart hammering against her ribs. She handed over her phone, but as she did, she felt a strange, cold clarity wash over her. Tell Beatrice I'll be down shortly, Evelyn added, her voice regaining a strength that made Marcus pause. I wouldn't want to keep the investors waiting. The dining room was a cathedral of glass and gold, designed to make anyone outside the Sterling bloodline feel small. Evelyn sat at the foot of the long mahogany table. The sapphire necklace Julian had chosen, feeling like a cold shackle against her skin. Across from her, Halloway's the kingdom's most ruthless investors watched her with the predatory curiosity of people weighing a commodity. The expansion into the European markets is contingent on stability, Arthur Halloway said, swirling a vintage Bordeaux. He glanced at Beatrice. And stability, as we know, starts with a secure succession. Beatrice smiled, a thin, sharp line. Exactly, Arthur. That's why the legacy clause is the backbone of this entire merger. It ensures the Sterling name remains untainted by external variables. Julian reached over and squeezed Evelyn's hand under the table. It was meant to be comforting, but his palm was sweaty. He didn't look at her. He looked at Arthur. We've taken every precaution, Julian said. The future of the company is protected. Evelyn felt a kick, a tiny, sharp movement in her womb. It wasn't just a flutter anymore. It felt like a reminder. External variable. That was what they called the mother of the next Sterling heir. Evelyn, dear, you've barely touched your sea bass, Beatrice remarked, her voice dripping with mock concern. Is the pregnancy making it hard to stomach the reality of your new responsibilities? Evelyn set her fork down. The silence in the room stretched, brittle and dangerous. She looked at Beatrice, then at Julian. I was just thinking about the word protection, Evelyn said, her voice steady. It's funny how often it's used to describe a cage. The table went dead silent. Arthur Halloway raised an eyebrow. Julian's grip on her hand tightened until it hurt. Evelyn, Julian warned, a low vibration in his throat. I'm curious, Arthur, Evelyn continued, ignoring her husband. As an investor, do you prefer a partner who hides the truth to keep things stable, or one who is transparent about their assets. Beatrice's eyes turned to flint. Evelyn, you are overstepping. Perhaps the exhaustion is getting to you. Marcus, please escort. I'm fine. Beatrice. Evelyn interrupted, her eyes locking onto her mother-in-law's. In fact, I've never felt more awake. I was just wondering if the Halloways knew about the third-party audit currently being conducted on the Sterling Trust's offshore holdings. Beatrice's face drained of color. The wineglass in her hand trembled. What are you talking about? There is no audit, isn't there? Evelyn tilted her head, mimicking Beatrice's own condescending gesture. I must have misheard the silent partner on the private line earlier. They seemed quite concerned about a discrepancy in the exit strategy funds. Suddenly, the heavy double doors to the dining room were pushed open. A security guard leaned in, looking panicked. Madam Sterling, I apologize, but there's a courier at the gate. He refuses to leave. He says he has a physical subpoena for the acting matriarch of the family. Julian stood up abruptly, his chair screeching against the marble. A subpoena for what? Evelyn's temporary phone, the one Beatrice had forced upon her, began to glow on the table. A notification appeared on the screen, visible to everyone nearby. Authentication successful. Accessing master accounts, Beatrice looked from the phone to Evelyn, her voice a terrified whisper. What have you done? I haven't done anything, Beatrice, Evelyn said, her voice dropping to a calm, chilling register. I'm simply allowing the truth to catch up with your lies. Beatrice's hand slammed onto the table, rattling the fine china. Julian, control your wife. This is a pathetic attempt at attention. She's clearly delusional. The pregnancy is affecting her mind. Julian looked between the two women, his face a mask of sweating indecision. Evelyn, give me the phone. We don't do this in front of the Halloways. We are a family. Are we? Evelyn stood up slowly, her movements fluid and deliberate. She didn't look like a victim anymore. She looked like a strategist. A family doesn't draft a clause to kidnap a child from its mother. A family doesn't use a merger to hide the fact that the Sterling Trust is hemorrhaging liquid assets. Arthur Halloway stood up, his face darkening. Hemorrhaging? Julian, what is she talking about? Your quarterly reports showed a 20% surplus. The reports were curated, Evelyn said, looking directly at Arthur. By Beatrice. She's been moving money into a shell company for years, an exit strategy not just for me, but for herself should the Sterling Empire ever crumble under your mounting debt, Julian. The silence that followed was deafening. Julian turned to his mother, his voice cracking. Mother, is that true? The audit, the subpoena, she's lying. Beatrice shrieked, her composure finally shattering. She's a penniless architect from a nothing family. How could she possibly know anything about our accounts? Because you underestimated the silent partner, Evelyn said. She picked up the temporary phone, sliding it across the table toward Arthur Holloway. The Sterling Trust was founded by Julian's grandfather and a silent partner who provided the initial capital. That partner's estate still holds 40% of the voting rights, rights that were passed down through a private lineage. Evelyn felt a surge of adrenaline, the fear that had paralyzed her for months finally evaporating. She thought of her late father, a man who had never spoken of his family's wealth, only of the importance of integrity. He had left her a key and a series of coordinates, things she had ignored until Beatrice's cruelty forced her to look closer. Beatrice's eyes went wide. That's impossible. That bloodline ended decades ago. It didn't, Evelyn said. It just went quiet. My father didn't want the Sterling name to define him, but I think it's time it defined me. Suddenly, the lights in the dining room flickered and dimmed. The wall-mounted monitors in the foyer, usually displaying the Sterling logo, hissed to life, showing a live data stream of the audit's findings. Red numbers scrolled rapidly, the evidence of Beatrice's embezzlement. Beatrice gasped, reaching for her son's arm. Call security. Remove her. Julian didn't move. He was staring at the monitors, the reality of his mother's betrayal sinking in. The security team is already occupied, Beatrice, Evelyn said. They're currently facilitating the arrival of the federal investigators. Just then, a sharp electronic chime rang out from the phone on the table. A video call request appeared. The caller ID read, "The Architect." Evelyn reached for the phone, but before she could answer, the front doors burst open. The sound of heavy footsteps echoed in the hall. "Evelyn," Julian whispered, his voice trembling. "What have you started?" "I didn't start this, Julian," she replied. "I'm just finishing it." The authorities didn't storm in with sirens. They entered with the terrifying, quiet efficiency of the law. 4 agents in dark suits stepped into the dining room, led by a woman with a sharp bob and a federal badge. The Halloways immediately backed away from the table, physically distancing themselves from the Sterling name as if it were suddenly radioactive. "Beatrice Sterling," the lead agent asked. "We have a warrant for the seizure of all digital records and financial ledgers associated with the Sterling Trust." Beatrice stood frozen, her hand still hovering near her throat. "This is a mistake. My son is the CEO. He can explain everything." "Julian, tell them." Julian looked at his mother, then at the monitor still scrolling through the red ink of her deceptions. For the first time, he didn't reach out to steady her. "I can't explain things I didn't know, Mother," he said, his voice hollow. He turned to Evelyn, his eyes pleading. "Evelyn, if you're behind this audit, you have to stop it. We can settle this privately. Think about the baby. Think about the scandal." "The scandal was created the moment your mother decided my child was a piece of property to be managed by a trust," Evelyn said. She felt the weight of the room shifting. The power that had once felt like a suffocating blanket was now a tool in her hands. "I'm not the one who put our child's future at risk, Julian. You did, by letting her hold the pen." The lead agent stepped forward. "Mrs. Thorne Sterling, we've received the decrypted files from your representative. They've been very helpful." Beatrice's head snapped toward Evelyn. "Representative? What representative?" "You're a girl who lived in a studio apartment when Julian found you." "I was an architect who valued precision," Evelyn corrected her. "And my father was a man who understood that the loudest person in the room is rarely the one with the most power." The phone on the table chimed again. The video call from the architect was still pending. Evelyn finally swiped the screen. Instead of a face, the camera showed a secure server room, and a voice digitally altered but calm spoke through the speakers. "The transfer of the legacy shares is complete, Evelyn. You now hold the controlling interest of the Sterling Silent Partners estate." Beatrice let out a strangled cry, her knees finally giving way as she sank back into her chair. 40%, she whispered. "You have 40%. Combined with the Halloways' impending withdrawal and the freeze on your personal accounts." Evelyn looked down at her mother-in-law. "I think that makes me the majority voice in this room." One of the agents moved toward Beatrice. "Ma'am, we need you to come with us for questioning regarding the offshore diversions." Julie and Beatrice screamed as they guided her up. "Do something." Julian took a step toward her, but Evelyn's voice stopped him cold. "If you walk out that door to help her, Julian, don't bother coming back to this house, or to me." The room plunged into a suffocating silence. The choice was laid bare: the mother who had built his cage, or the wife who was tearing it down. Julian stayed rooted to the spot, his shadow stretching long across the floor as his mother was led away. Just as the front doors clicked shut, Julian's personal phone rang. He looked at the screen, his face turning ashen. "It's the board," he whispered. "They've seen the news." "Let it ring," Evelyn said, her voice a quiet command. "We have more important things to discuss." Julian stared at his vibrating phone as if it were a live grenade. "The board will dissolve the CEO position by morning if I don't answer this, Evelyn. Everything we've built, the Sterling legacy, it'll be gone in hours." The Sterling legacy was a lie built on stolen foundations, Evelyn said, walking toward the head of the table. She didn't sit in Beatrice's chair. She stood behind it, her hands gripping the high velvet back. You didn't build this, Julian. You inherited a facade and spent your life trying to paint over the cracks your mother made. Julian dropped the phone onto the mahogany surface. The ringing stopped, leaving a ringing silence in its wake. What do you want? You have the shares. You have the leverage. Are you going to strip me of everything too? Evelyn looked at him, searching for the man she had fallen in love with, the one who had promised her a partnership, not a prison. I want the truth. Did you know about the custody clause? Did you know she planned to take my child the moment it was born? Julian's gaze flickered. He looked away, his jaw tightening. I thought I could talk her out of it once the baby arrived. I thought if I played along with the merger, I could protect you both in the long run. You don't protect people by keeping them in the dark, Julian. That's called management. I am your wife, not a project. She reached into the pocket of her maternity dress and pulled out a small, encrypted flash drive, the one the architect had sent her weeks ago. On this drive is the evidence of every bribe, every falsified report, and every offshore account Beatrice used. But there's also something else. Julian looked up. What? Oh, proof of your innocence, Evelyn said quietly. Or your guilt. It contains the logs of every internal approval. If your digital signature is on those embezzlement documents, you'll be joining your mother in that police car. Julian's face went translucent. I signed whatever she put in front of me. I trusted her. Then you're either a criminal or a fool, Evelyn said. And I haven't decided which one I'm willing to stay married to. The Halloways, who had been whispering in the corner, stepped forward. Arthur Halloway cleared his throat. Mrs. Thorne Sterling, if you truly hold the silent partner shares, the board will listen to you. We can pivot. We can distance the company from Beatrice and restructure under your guidance. I'm an architect, Mr. Halloway. I know how to handle a teardown, Evelyn replied. But I don't work with people who view families as liabilities. Suddenly, the house's intercom system buzzed a sharp, jarring sound. It was the gate security. Mrs. Sterling. There's a woman here. She says she's the original architect. She says the quiet call was just the beginning. Evelyn's heart hammered. She hadn't expected a physical visitor. Before she could respond, the monitors in the room flickered again, replacing the financial data with a grainy black and white photo of a woman who looked hauntingly like Evelyn's sewn grandmother. Who is that? Julian whispered. The reason your mother was so afraid of the silent partner, Evelyn realized, her voice trembling. It wasn't just about the money, it was about the bloodline. A heavy thud echoed from the front foyer. The doors hadn't been pushed. They had been unlocked from the outside. The woman who stepped into the dining room did not look like a billionaire, yet she carried the air of someone who owned the ground she walked on. She was elderly, her silver hair pulled into a sharp chignon, wearing a simple wool coat that looked out of place amidst the sterling gold leaf. Beatrice's assistant, Marcus, tried to intercept her. Madam, this is a private residence. You need to leave immediately. The woman didn't even look at him. She held up a small, weathered copper key, the twin to the one Evelyn's father had left her. I built this house before your employer's mother was even a thought, young man. I suggest you step aside. Marcus froze, his eyes darting to the key. He stepped back. Evelyn felt a strange pull in her chest. You're the architect, she whispered. I am Eleanor Thorne, the woman said, her voice resonant and clear. She looked at Evelyn, her eyes softening for a fleeting second before turning into flint as she surveyed the room. And I am the reason the Sterling name exists. My father was the silent partner. He gave Julian's grandfather the capital to start this empire on one condition: that the Thorne line would always hold the power to dismantle it if the Sterlings ever lost their way. Julian stepped forward, looking bewildered. My grandfather never mentioned a Thorne family. He said the capital came from an anonymous trust. Because he was ashamed, Eleanor said. He was a man of ego who hated being beholden to a woman's wealth. We stayed in the shadows to let the Sterlings play at being kings, but we kept the keys to the castle. She turned to Evelyn. Your father, my nephew, wanted you to have a normal life. He didn't want you burdened by this rot. But when I heard how Beatrice was treating a pregnant woman of our blood, I realized the silence had gone on too long. Arthur Holloway cleared his throat. Sensing a shift in the wind, Mrs. Thorne, if you are the primary beneficiary of the original trust, we should discuss the merger's future. We can still save the Sterling brand. The Sterling brand is a carcass, Eleanor said dismissively. She turned to Evelyn. The choice is yours, Evelyn. As the newest mother in our line, you hold the deciding vote. You can let the Halloways strip the company for parts. You can try to save Julian's position, or you can burn it all down and start fresh. Julian looked at Evelyn, his eyes desperate. Evelyn, please, we can fix this. I'll do whatever you say. We can be the partners you wanted. Evelyn looked at Julian, then at the empty chair where Beatrice had sat for decades, ruling with fear. She thought of the legacy clause and the way Julian had stayed silent while his mother planned to steal their child. Cruelty is loud, Julian, Evelyn said, her voice echoing in the vast room. But self-respect is quiet. It doesn't need to scream to be felt. What are you saying? Julian asked, his voice trembling. Evelyn looked at Eleanor, then back at her husband. I'm saying that the transition isn't just about the company. It's about me. She picked up the copper key Eleanor had placed on the table. The weight of it felt right. The merger is dead, Evelyn announced. You can't do that. Arthur Holloway shouted. I can, Evelyn replied. And Julian, I need you to leave. The silence that followed Evelyn's command was heavier than any threat Beatrice had ever leveled. Julian stood motionless, his mouth slightly open, as if the air had suddenly become too thin to breathe. Leave. Julian finally managed to choke out. Evelyn, this is our home, our child's home. This is a monument to a woman who tried to erase me, Evelyn said, her gaze unwavering. And you were the one who held the door open for her. You didn't choose us, Julian. You chose the Sterling name. Now you get to keep it, but you keep it alone. Arthur Holloway began to protest, but a single look from Eleanor Thorne silenced him. The power in the room had recalibrated. The predators were now merely spectators to a birth of a different kind. The paperwork for the dissolution of the marriage will be on your desk tomorrow. Evelyn continued, her voice gaining a melodic strength. Along with a restructuring plan that removes the Sterling family from the board entirely. The assets will be moved into a new trust, one that values ethics over legacy. Julian looked at her, and for the first time, he saw not the delicate wife he needed to manage, but the architect who knew exactly which walls were load-bearing. I loved you, he whispered, a final, desperate plea. Then you should have respected me, Evelyn replied. I choose you always, that's what you used to say to me. But today, I choose myself, and I choose our child. Julian lowered his head, the weight of his own silence finally crushing him. Without another word, he turned and walked toward the foyer, his footsteps echoing like a fading heartbeat. As the front doors closed, the oppressive atmosphere of the Sterling era seemed to evaporate. Eleanor walked over to Evelyn, placing a firm, warm hand on her shoulder. You did well, Evelyn. It takes a specific kind of courage to dismantle a life and rebuild it from the ruins. I'm not rebuilding a life, Eleanor, Evelyn said, looking down at the copper key in her palm. I'm building a future. One where my daughter knows that her worth isn't a commodity to be traded. Evelyn walked to the large window, looking out over the sprawling estate. The rain had stopped, and the first hints of dawn were breaking over the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and violet. She felt a strong, rhythmic kick against her palm, a reminder of the life that would never know the coldness of a legacy clause. She picked up her phone and made one final call. When the voice answered, Evelyn didn't hesitate. "This is Evelyn Thorne," she said, her voice clear and resonant. "The audit is complete. It's time to start the construction." She hung up and smiled. The sterling name was a ghost, and the silent partner was finally heard. In the quiet of the morning, Evelyn realized that the greatest power wasn't in the wealth she had inherited, but in the voice she had finally found. Justice wasn't a loud explosion. It was the quiet click of a key in a new lock.